it's a kind of way of turning the act of consumption inside out, right? So that instead of taking God and pulling God into the small self, we are kind of taken and consumed into the body of Christ. We're taken up into something much larger. So it's God consuming us and not just us consuming God. And so that then puts us into a much larger body and a much larger community of people with whom we're connected in that way. And that then kind of overcomes this sort of isolation that the other kind of consumerism leads us to, I think.
He says once we see ourselves as a larger body and a larger community, we will start to look at our dollar in a different light. He encourages people to live a simpler lifestyle, stepping away from big box stores and mass-produced products, and instead supporting local, smaller operations that give our cities and towns a sense of community.
One of the things that I talk about is the tremendous difference there is between our society, where the things that people have are things that they bought, and most of societies through most of history where the things that people had were mostly things that they made. And it's just a really profound difference in the way you relate to the material world. So taking back at least some parts of production, kind of making the home a place of production. It's true that buying locally and organic and so on can be more expensive, but in general, the move towards simplification and personal economies doesn't have to be more expensive, and simplification can oftentimes mean scaling down and not scaling up.
But how realistic is it to scale down? With over $90 billion spent on food alone each year in Canada, we wondered how many consumers are shopping locally or even organically.
Do you think we should become more simplistic, like get away from the big box stores and do more like local produce?
It works in like an area like this, but not in the suburbs. It's just way too big to open up like these little things, and it's more like fast-paced people that don't have the time for that.
Well, I think it's important to sustain the local farmers.
Growing locally, you're supporting our local companies. And then as terms of clothing, same thing, supporting the small businesses instead of the big corporations.
And I find that in my own life. I'm not pure by any stretch of the imagination. You know, I live in a house, and we try to live our lives as simply as possible, but there's all sorts of things that I'm enmeshed in. But one of the things that I find is that there's a real joy to trying to live intentionally. And so one of the things we participate in is there's a cooperative of small family farms, mostly organic, that markets through churches in the Twin Cities, the Whole Farm Co-op. And so we buy a lot of our produce from them.
Statistics show that this past Christmas, only 47% of those consumers polled stated they would pare down on their shopping. Cavanaugh admits it is a challenge to scale down one's life, and it is a decision one has to make on their own, without the guilt trip.
And I think people feel bad already. You know, people don't like the impersonality of big box stores, I think, for the most part. They don't like the anonymity of the kind of economic relationships they have. They feel vaguely uneasy about the products that they buy that they know are being made under unjust conditions somewhere over on the other side of the world, but they don't know what to do about it. They feel kind of trapped by marketing. People, I think, already feel coerced. And so to try to help people recover a sense of their own freedom, you know, is really what I'm about.
So he encourages people to take one step at a time, and a second look at how they shop and how they see their faith manifested in the decisions they make.
And I think people spontaneously feel when their faith lives are integrated with their material lives that I think people feel more whole, they feel more at peace, and there's all sorts of different kind of little ways and big ways that people can do that. But it's a sense of empowerment. I mean, there's such a sense of fatality about the larger economy and the market these days. People feel, I know that my shoes are made by, people in China making 30 cents an hour, but what can you do? There's this sense that you're faced against this, huge system that's colluding against you. And so when you find ways of resisting that, I think there's a real kind of spontaneous joy, like you're getting back some of your life and some of your freedom.
Freedom, he says, to live a life that God intended us to live, one he refuses to see as pared down, but simply more intentional and community-driven.
I think it's an abundant life. I think it's a much better life, and that's how you sell it. It's I have come that you might have life and have it more abundantly, and Jesus is not talking about more stuff. He's talking about relationships and relationships with people and relationships with God.
In Toronto, Ontario, Magdalene John, 100 Huntley Street.